everybody, this is Eve West. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to a book I wrote. It's called Follow. It looks at spirituality from a very holistic view. It's not just a psychological aspect of a human being, but I also look at the earthly aspect as well. In the book, I talk about the various constructs of the matrix and how, our familial structures, how religion, education, media and entertainment, the government itself, how all of these various constructs create what we call a false ego or a false self. And so, the book talks about how these various constructs make us deny an aspect of ourselves. So either the psychological or the earthly. For example, in this incarnation, I'm a very feminine ego. And so I was actually taught since a young child to deny my earthly self and to deny the flesh. And so, this book pretty much just exposes and uncovers and sheds light on those various aspects of this false reality that cause us to be unholy aspects of ourselves, and it doesn't allow us to embrace the totality of who we are. And so, if you haven't already done so, I strongly suggest that you look at the other videos, because they every video gives you some prior knowledge about the next chapter. And I think that it's important for you to get prior knowledge, because a lot of the topics that I talk about are very unorthodox. They're very unorthodox. They're not necessarily information that you're going to hear, everywhere. You're not going to hear it very much at church, or you're not going to hear it at work, or, on TV, or listening to your favorite song, so to speak. Not from a superficial way, basically, but it's very important, I think, that you just kind of hear my perspective and hear my voice, if you will. Some people consider the topics that I talk about to be occult, or the information I give to be occult. I don't like to use occult because it definitely carries negative connotations. I just like to think of occult knowledge as just knowledge that's not very mainstream, if you will. This book is very controversial, so I know that it will spark a lot of conversation, if you will. I'm not necessarily looking for anyone to agree with me on these various topics, but I do think that by giving a feminine perspective about various topics, spiritual topics, that it sparks a conversation. It definitely sparks a conversation by giving this feminine perspective, especially within such a patriarchal society. Our society is very masculine, if you will, and so the feminine is definitely hunted within this construct, because the matrix is upheld by illusions. It's upheld by glamour. And so, whenever you have someone who's actually exposing things that hold up glamour and lies, it's definitely pursued and hunted. And so I've actually gone through a whole lot of hell to actually make it to speaking my truth and telling about my experience, and hoping that it will in the future help my future avatar to rise above the lies and the glamour that it's being told within this false construct, if you will. So the last chapter was called All of the Lights, and in All of the Lights, I talk about knowledge, and I opened up with an excerpt from the Gospel of Philip, which is ignorance is the mother of all evil. And I talk about how true knowledge is within your experience. If you have knowledge that's not within your experience, it's not considered knowledge to me. And so in the Matrix, when we're born and we descend into this reality, which I liken to hell, that's why we greet each other with hello. But when we descend into this reality, we're told a lot of things that aren't true. And one of the examples that I put in the last chapter in All of the Lights is about the universe, and how my teachers always taught me that the universe was outside of myself, and they taught me about the different planets and things, but they had never been to those planets themselves. So what they were teaching was not something that was within their experience per se. So they're just handing down information that was handed down to them. And so whenever you're doing this, it's very dangerous, because you're pretty much just handing down lies. The universe is not outside of us. The universe is within us. And so, as you continue, as you start to wake up, as I call it, within your incarnation, you start to go back and you see the outer world as an inner condition, if you will. So this chapter, this video is dedicated to the next chapter, which is called Cream. And Cream deals a lot with money. It deals a lot with money. And actually the Iggy Azalea video called Cream really, it definitely inspired me, if you will, for this particular chapter, because when you look at Iggy Azalea's Cream, you really get an idea of, like, for example, you get an idea of what my astral self looks like. You know, I'm very much a feminine ego, as I've already spoken of before. You know, my ego is very psychological and intellectual per se, but I'm the total opposite of that in the astral. So I'm very much filthy rich on the astral plane, and very much just about money and about sex and, you know, just super duper masculine and that type of thing. And so there's a major discrepancy between this ego that's talking to you and that particular self. And so in Cream, you know, I talk about separation of the mind. And we look at the Trinity in Christianity. We typically think the Trinity is something that's good per se. But I paint a very different picture of the Trinity. And the Trinity really separates the left and the right brain. And so we see this separation in the book of Genesis, where God separated Adam from Eve. In other words, he separated matter from spirit, if you will. And so whenever you create a separation, you have to have a middle path, or a middle aspect to the being. And so the thing is that, you know, whenever you're separating the mind and you're not allowing a connection through Christ, because Christ actually should be within that middle area between the left and right brain, you have Satan, or Saturn, if you will. And so it's the energy system of Saturn that actually separates the left from the right brain. And so I talk about that, and I talk about how the matrix, you know, just upholds this separation. And also, you know, the matrix is all about disintegration instead of integration between the left and the right brain. Like, for example, stars, the five-pointed star. The five-pointed star has many different meanings, if you will. Like, when we think of the five-pointed star, we think about the Star of David, which represents the Jews. We think about you know, the pentagram, which actually oftentimes is related to witchcraft. But you know, really the five-pointed star is actually related to the reptilian brain, the five senses. That's pretty much what the five-pointed star is about, which you can see, taste, touch, smell, and hear. And so we see stars in all constructs of the matrix. For example, you'll see stars oftentimes on flags, if you will. The five-pointed star, you'll see it on the flags of various countries. In education, oftentimes teachers, they give their kids stars if they do well on an assignment or something like that. You know, so, and also in media and entertainment, like, say, for example, if you want to go see a movie, or if you want to see, if you want to go to a restaurant or something like that, you'll check online to see how many stars. And so, you know, we see stars pretty much everywhere. And the five-pointed star is just pretty much an homage, if you will, to the Freemason secret society creators that, you know, make up this reality, because this reality is based upon the senses, the five senses. It's based upon the pentagram. It's based upon Saturn. It's based upon Satan, basically. And so that's why the five-pointed star is so important and integral to this hell realm. You know, that's why we say hello. So, you know, it's definitely a part of, they've embedded that symbol into all facets of our life, if you will, because it's about the reptilian brain. So I wanted to just stress that, and I wanted to stress separation, how separation of the left and right brain produces phantoms that, you know, whereas, you know, the Christ is supposed to live between the left and the right brain, that joins and integrates the left and the right and left brain together, but Satan actually disintegrates the left and the right brain. And so it's through that separation, if you will, that causes problems and psychological splits and fractures within the consciousness, if you will. So there's a good bit of occult, I guess you would call, knowledge that's not necessarily mainstream, if you will, in this chapter. And, I really, focus a lot on my role, if you will, in this chapter of being a sacral prostitute. When we think of sacral prostitution or what have you, sacral prostitution is when someone is mind controlled to be very saintly in the physical, so they can actually be a horny devil, if you will, in the astral. So, I look at various examples, if you will, to paint a picture of this. But, desire is definitely cultivated within this realm. This realm cannot exist without desire. That's why we keep reincarnating back, if you will, to hell, because there's something that we want to work out, and there's a restriction there that prevents us from working out our desires. And so all the constructs of the matrix are actually utilize, or actually create this desire, if you will, and prevent us from grounding the things that we want. I talk about the forefathers of America and how they say that we have the pursuit of happiness. And so this world is not meant for you to be happy. This world is meant for you to pursue happiness. And so on the astral realm, your astral self will reap the benefit of your desire. So you're a slave for the astral, and that astral aspect of you is a slave for the elite who actually created the matrix reality in and of itself. So, I talk a little bit about that, and I talk about, desires such as like Christianity. We think about Christianity, and looking at the word Christian, I've mentioned this before in other videos, but the IAN suffix shun means a variant of. And so when in the word Christian, shun meaning a variant of Christ, it tells you right there within the word itself, Christian, that Christianity is just a part of Christ. It's not Christ in its totality. And so Christianity represents the psychological, spiritual, etheric aspect of Christ. It does not focus on the earthly. And that's why when you see people who are super duper Christian, they actually have very debased and disgusting sacrals. If you suppress the earthly aspect of yourself to a fault, you will actually start to act out in very nasty and filthy ways. And I've mentioned that, with the Catholic Church, if you will, and how, like priests are forbidden to marry and forbidden to copulate with women. And so we see them act out, their suppression in very disgusting ways. Many of them, they, molest little kids and things like that. And, they do things that aren't considered, things that they should do, if you will, by the Catholic Church. And so, it's been the spark of controversy, sorry. But the thing is that, they do lots of things, if you will, that are not, that aren't in integrity with the soul, because the soul is supposed to be balanced. You have a masculine and you have a feminine aspect of you. And so, when you have this balance between the masculine, when you don't have this balance between the masculine and the feminine aspect of yourself, then you start to accrue phantoms. And so when you have phantoms and unconscious aspects of you that you cannot ground into reality, you tend to one day just break. And when you actually break, and and this aspect of you that's very now debased and nasty comes out, then you're blamed for it. And so when we see priests in the Catholic Church that have molested kids and so forth, we don't look at the construct that created their debasement. We look at them, and so they wear the shame. And so basically in this construct, in this whole matrix reality, I just talk about the environment, because the culprit, the person who's the so-called culprit wears the shame, but it really should be the people who created facilitated the environment that created this type of human being, if you will. So when I talk about being a sacral prostitute or a whore, I'll be brought to judgment for being a whore on the astral realm. But the thing is that the whore makers get away scot-free. And no pun intended, because my handler on the astral realm is actually a king of Scotland. So it's King James of Scotland. And so, he gets off scot-free, although he is a whore maker, if you will. By suppressing my earthly nature in the physical, he is able to capitalize upon that earthly nature, if you will, in the astral realm. And so, I talk about how the suppression within the physical and the desires that are cultivated within the physical, definitely hurt the soul, and it doesn't do the soul any justice, if you will. There are many different examples, if you will, that I put in the book. Like, for example, Lady Gaga's Alejandro, that video really, shows how Lady Gaga was being programmed as a saint in her physical and her unconscious, or her ego was being programmed as a saint as she was asleep. But when she woke up, she was a filthy whore. And so, the Catholic Church definitely praises saints. They praise saints, but a saint is a filthy whore in the astral realm, because, we're not just etheric, spiritual, psychological beings. We are also earthly beings. And so since we're purposely imbalanced as little kids, I was sexually abused as a child. And since we're purposely imbalanced as little kids, this is just this type of carnal aspect of us is inevitable when we ascend, to the fourth. Some people call it the fourth dimension, but when we ascend to our unconscious self at night when we go to sleep. And so one of the the videos that I make an example of this is called Tip Drill. It's called Tip Drill by Nelly and the Saint Lunatics. And it's funny because, Saint Lunatic sounds like a oxymoron, right? If you're a saint, how can you be a lunatic? And so, Luna refers to the moon, and the moon refers to the unconscious mind. That's why the moon comes out at night. So darkness represents unconsciousness, like what you don't know about yourself. And so it's telling you right there in that name that a saint is a lunatic, that you are just a very unbalanced, if you will, ego. And in that video is very representative of who I am on the astral realm. So if you look at the video Tip Drill for which is a song by Nelly and the Saint Lunatics, you will see women engaging in very just promiscuous behavior, and dressed scantily clad, if you will, and just participating in orgies and things like that. So very just very extreme, I guess what you would call sexual escapades, if you will. And so that is who I am in the astral realm. But that was purposely done, and my soul was purposely if you will, desecrated, if you will, to become that, if you will. So when you think about the whore of Babylon or what have you, the whore of Babylon is pretty much just a slave on the astral, someone who's been abused, who is a beta sex kitten slave, who's been suppressed and made to be a saint or a lamb, a sacrificial lamb of God, to basically bear his sins and carry his sins, so to speak. We think about the Lord and God and Revelation. It says that he slays a lamb so he can receive pleasure. And so when I grew up thinking about God and learning about God, God was supposed to be all powerful, and also too, God wasn't really, concerned with pleasure. But here in Revelation, he needs to actually kill something innocent to have pleasure. So, when I start to wake up and really start to look at the metaphysics of the Bible and to look at the scriptures in a more insightful way, I really started to see God in a very different light, if you will. It wasn't the same God that was all powerful. And so, when you look at, my handlers, on the astral realm, which is King James, and you look at his affiliations with Freemasonry and, you know, the people who are responsible for this false construct that we live in, you know, it goes to show that they definitely need hybrids. They need, you know, people to sustain themselves in the astral realm. So, you know, I talk about, you know, desire. I talk about this, there's a video called Mr. Brightside by the Killers, and I really think that video is very representative of the sacral prostitution ring that we have on the astral realm, that I'm a part of, you know, that I work for on the astral realm. If you look at that video, you know, there's a handler, if you will, who runs the whorehouse, and so he's played by Eric Roberts, which is Julia Roberts' brother, and he you know, he has an apple, and so out of all the whores, there's one whore who is super duper you know, white, if you will, very white and very fair. And so, you know, when he tells her to go to service a John or what have you, you know, he throws her an apple. And so the apple represents knowledge. And that goes to show how, you know, her earthly is debased and she becomes a filthy whore to service these men because her psychological mind has been inflated. So the more knowledge you get, the more psychological you are in your earthly and etheric and spiritual you are in your earthly, the more hornier and more carnal you are in your astral self. And so it goes to show that he constantly makes her fairer and fairer, taking her melanin out. The more he gives her knowledge, the more her melanin is removed, and she becomes just a horny devil, if you will. So that video, Mr. Brightside, is very representative, you know, of what happens when you're pushing the intellect so much, pushing the spiritual and neglecting the earthly. And we see this in examples like, you know, on TV, like 19 Kids and Counting. You know, on 19 Kids and Counting, we see how the Duggards are super duper spiritual people, but, you know, a lot of the girls in the family got molested, and, you know, they're always so quick to hurry up and get married. You know, why is that? You know, they want to hurry up and get married because they have earthly needs. They've suppressed their earthly for so long, and they have, you know, focused so much on their spiritual aspect of themselves, and they're so plastic in a way that, you know, it's like, oh, you know, I need to hurry up and marry. I need to, you know, I have these earthly urges, and now, you know, I feel compelled to molest someone because, you know, this is not tolerated within my community, and these feelings and things like that. So, you know, the earthly is definitely made disgusting on the astral realm, because the creators of our society have, you know, have done this to us, have damaged the soul. And so my soul is very damaged, very damaged. And as I wake up and I, you know, continue to examine and do introspection, you know, I really just, you know, it's appalling. I don't really know. I really don't have words to express you know, how the different constructs have created this false aspect of me that have made me a shell of myself and caused me to live without integrity and an unholy life that makes me a horny devil on the astral realm. You know, to me, it's very sick and disgusting. And so at judgment, I have to wear the crown of a whore when the whore maker gets to get off scot-free, you know, and as beta sex slaves, just like going back to the movie Eyes Wide Shut. If you remember Mandy, she was a sacral prostitute, and, you know, she was abused and sacrificed by the, you know, by the secret society, and just treated as if she was nothing. And so that's what happens to us. You know, we are definitely, you know, treated as if we're nothing and discarded, if you will. But, you know, we have souls and we have feelings and we have emotions, but, you know, the people that own this reality, they don't have feelings, they don't have emotions, and so they really don't care, and so they don't have that interconnectedness to really, you know, be able to feel our pain, but we're groomed to feel their pain and to take on their sins. So, you know, I pretty much shed light on that, and, you know, how Christianity is just, you know, a part of all the monotheistic religions are just made by the creators of this reality, if you will, to suppress the earthly and inflate the spiritual. And they make fun of, they make fun of us too. Actually, like when you see, you know, hip hop. When you see hip hop artists such as Kanye West, and you see Jay-Z, if you will, they are, you know, they're just making fun, if you will. You know, they're just making fun, calling themselves Hove and Yeezus and and so forth. And so I was groomed as a little girl to believe in Jesus and Jehovah, whatever the case is. And here they have stars, you know, that actually work for them to make fun of these particular you know, just demiurge, ascendant masters, if you will, because you know, without a third eye, you don't necessarily have the insight to know what these particular figures represent. So, you know, I really focus on the desire aspect of, you know, of how basically, you know, how we're suppressed within our earthly nature to become horny devils. And so in this chapter, the subtitle of this chapter is called, I Want a White Boy So I Can Have Some White Joy. And so this comes from a documentary called A Whore's Glory, because in being a sacral prostitute, I was made to be a prostitute for Caucasian men on the astral realm. And so I was purposely cultivated since a little child to unconsciously want to be with white men. And, you know, I talk about how, you know, all of my, with my upbringing, I never really saw black men in a very positive light, you know, and I give countless examples, if you will, in the, in this particular chapter about how, you know, the black man was just painted in a very negative light, if you will. And so, you know, as I got older and, you know, shows started to be phased out, like the Cosby Show showing, you know, black families being, you know, more affluent, if you will. And we started to see more shows like Love and Hip Hop and things like that. And so it definitely demonized the black community. And so we had shows such as Friends and, you know, Seinfeld and, you know, all in Cheers, and, you know, it showed, you know, more westernized white America, you know, being more, you know, more balanced, if you will, you know, instead of, you know, and less satanic. And I say satanic because, you know, Satan is just the allegorical depiction of Saturn, which is the god of the material. And so when we look at, you know, a lot of, you know, black people in the media, you know, we're very much flashy, very much about the material, about what we're wearing and what houses we have, what cars we drive, and so forth. So there's not very much balance, if you will. And so it really caused me to, you know, just caused a whole lot of self-hatred, but not on a conscious level. All of my self-hatred about my race was actually on an unconscious level. And so we don't really realize how media and entertainment and the various facets, you know, the constructs of the matrix, how they affect our unconscious and how they actually create a war within ourselves. And, you know, it's funny because I remember, well, in this chapter, it was interesting writing this chapter because it was like, you know, I'm writing about someone else, which I am, you know, because I consider my ego and also my unconscious self to be just fallacies and not real. They're just illusory constructs. But, you know, I remember when I had gotten married to my husband and we moved to Charlotte, and, you know, he had some friends that lived there and they had invited us over. And, you know, I didn't really know these friends, you know, very much. I've heard of them. He had spoken of them. I didn't really know them. But, you know, they were black people. And so I wasn't very used to being around a lot of black people, you know, at that point. You know, just kind of recalling back, you know, I went to a more integrated college, although I did visit another college, which was a historic black college. But, you know, I was gradually, you know, assimilated more to, you know, being with my my white brethren at that point. And you know, most of my friends were white, and you know, and so it was very interesting when I went to this party with my husband and the black people were there. I got really scared. I got really scared because you know, I didn't really know how to relate to black people, and I'm black. So, you know, I was just like, you know, and at that moment, I didn't really necessarily know what to do from a psychological standpoint because, you know, I felt under attack, if you will. I felt like, you know, everyone was going to know I was white inside or something like that. And, you know, I didn't know how to interact with, you know, with my people. And so I started to like embellish my language, and you know, I started to you know, talk a certain way and try to pretend you know, like I was down or whatever the case is. And you know, I really made a fool of myself. And my ex-husband, you know, he told me, he was like, you know, what was that? And I really didn't know what it was. You know, my ex-husband, he's black, you know, but he's very much, you know, westernized like I am. You know, we're, you know, we're more neutral than anything. And so, you know, the thing is when I got into that situation where, you know, I was faced with a lot of black people, you know, and I wasn't, you know, I couldn't necessarily relate to them. It made me very afraid and very scared. And so that just goes to show how programming definitely can affect your consciousness, if you will. It definitely can affect your consciousness, and it could actually turn you against yourself. And when you really discover and find out what the programming has done to you, it's too late. You know, we don't get to determine what goes into the mind. The mind just gathers everything, and we are everything. And so that's why when I talk about, you know, brain frequencies, and I talk about being in a theta brainwave frequency, if someone shows you a picture of something and then they quickly take it away, you know, and you can't really recall it in a beta brainwave frequency, that person owns your mind. They know something about you that you don't know. And so they can retrieve that information at any time. But if you can't get yourself into a state of intense meditation or hypnosis to actually obtain that information, you do not have control over the mind. And so, you know, through, you know, Christianity and media and entertainment, I talk about, you know, how my family structure, you know, I was always called white girl. And, you know, at first, you know, this was kind of like tongue-in-cheek. You know, I didn't really understand why I was called white girl. You know, at first I thought my family called me that because, you know, of my lighter hue or what have you, or, you know, my dialect, because, you know, in Charleston, blacks, we speak a dialect. It's called Gullah, but I never spoke Gullah. And so, you know, and Gullah is just a mixture of English and African dialect. When the slaves came in through the seaports of Charleston, you know, they weren't able to speak their native language. They had to speak English. And so being forced to speak English, they kind of meshed the two, their native dialect with the English dialect, to you know, to carry secrets, if you will, and to you know, maintain a sense of home, so to speak. And so it just became a dialect for them that they interacted with each other. And, you know, but I didn't speak this dialect. My dad does. But, you know, in my family, I don't really, you know, I don't know. In my family, I don't necessarily, you know, fit in. I never really fit in or what have you. So they would call me white girl. And they would also call me a witch. They would call me witchy poo. And so I definitely have been burned at the stake as a witch many incarnations, you know, because of my psychic abilities, because I'm a very feminine, exacerbated feminine ego. And whenever you're super feminine, you're super psychic, you're super smart. You know, some people in New Age literature, they refer to us as being Messiah seeds or something like that. But whenever you have a super psychic being, you can't necessarily put anything over on them. They're able to see things before they happen. And so that type of being in the Matrix is very much a threat, very much hunted, and very much watched, because, you know, when it comes to the DNA of a Messiah seed, or whatever you want to call it, a psychic super duper feminine ego, they have the ability to dismantle the entire system. And so, you know, they become like public enemy number one, or whatever the case is. But, you know, I really just focus on how, you know, I was definitely, you know, cultivated to love white men. And, you know, when I got divorced from my husband, you know, I definitely, you know, sought white men more than any other demographic. And I talk about in this chapter how, you know, I associated white with wealth. And, you know, when I was a little girl and my sacral was deactivated through sexual abuse and so forth, it actually, you know, deactivated my ability to manifest. And so when I looked at various constructs of the matrix from an unconscious standpoint, out of all the demographics, it is the white male that is the, you know, that is oftentimes seen as the most successful reaper, if you will, of the earth. And I'm not saying that in its totality, but when it comes to a picture that our creators actually paint and a lot of the programming that I received, it appeared that way to me. And so from an unconscious standpoint, I really didn't want a white man. I really just wanted to be a white man. And this really goes back to, you know, Freudian psychology. It goes back to like the Oedipus complex, if you will, where, you know, a child wants to be with its father, so to speak. Whereas, you know, you want to, you know, you want you want a penis. And I know that sounds weird, you know, from a superficial standpoint, but if you're looking at this from a psychological standpoint, you know, you develop toward, if you're a very feminine ego, you definitely start to envy a penis, and you want a penis, actually. You want to become a man, or you want to become male from a psychological standpoint. Now, not from like a, you know, it's not like I want like I really do want a penis or something like that. At least I don't think I do, you know, but, you know, but you want that masculine aspect of you, you want that sacral aspect of you. And so oftentimes when I talk about the elite, I talk about them being the Lord of the Rings, because, you know, they actually hold the sacral masculine aspect hostage. And so that's why we can't have holy matrimony. So holy matrimony is being married to your nature, being married to your sacral earthly aspect of yourself. And so they prevent that, and by preventing that union between the sacral, the feminine, and the masculine, or Adam and Eve, whatever you want to call it, they create perversion. And so they capitalize upon this, and so they've capitalized upon it by making me a you know, a sacral prostitute. And you know, I focus a lot on the white male and the black woman, especially, you know, when it comes to the you know, the Pope, if you will. You know, when it comes to the Pope, or what have you, you know, when I refer to the Pope, I'm not really referring to the Pope that we see. You know, everything in this reality is just a delusion, so to speak. It's an illusion. And so the Pope that I refer to is not this actual Pope that we see, which his name is Pope Francis, or what have you. But, you know, when we look at like examples of, you know, the Pope, like for example, Nicki Minaj, she was photographed, if you will, with the Pope at the Grammys one year, married to the Pope, or a bride of the Pope. You know, we see that, you know, this demographic between the white male and the black woman hardly ever comes together within the matrix, because they're very polarized. You know, the black woman is very integrated, and the white male is very disintegrated in many ways. And so until there's a meeting of these two types of energies, we will have the dichotomy in Christianity of you know, Alpha and Omega, you know, the giver of life and the taker of life, you know, the sower and the reaper type of thing. And so we have to definitely, you know, dilute these, not dilute, but integrate these energies. And so, you know, we're not above or below the earth. You know, I feel that, you know, the black woman rises above the earth, whereas the white male falls and descends below it. But we're not here to be above or below the earth. We're here to not be of, you know, we're here not to be of the world, but in the world, you know. Yeah, is that right? We're here to, to be in the world, but not of the world, so to speak. And so, I really focus on, the fact that I'm a prisoner in the astral realm, made to siphon my sexual nature for these elite handlers, and just really taught a lot of self-hatred, to hate myself, and to, from the depictions of black women in the media, and through my relationship with my mother, um, through the constructs of religion and so forth, and just to accrue just a distaste for my earthly aspect of myself, so that could be reaped and benefited on the astral realm for these secret society members. Is, it's definitely a travesty. It's definitely sick. But I definitely go through exposing it. I talk a little bit about my twin flame also in this chapter, who is a white male, and he and I definitely are yin and yang, very polarized aspects of each other. He's a banker, and has worked at places like Goldman Sachs, and worked on Wall Street, but here I am, a teacher, and so I'm more feminine, and I'm nurturing, and that type of thing. We're not really, we're from two different worlds. However, we attract magnetically because we are from two different worlds. And so when I met my twin flame, I really just wanted his I don't know. I really just wanted his life, so to speak. I know that sounds really crazy, but I really just wanted his life. I wanted his life force for my own, for myself, because I had penis envy, or a masculine, I envied him, his masculinity, to be able to manifest, whereas he envied my ability to be nurturing and kind, and that type of thing. And so we didn't want to be together, but we wanted to be together because we wanted the energy from each other. And so it's not a match made in heaven, so to speak. It's more of a match made in hell. So for the most part, that's what I focus on. And I focus on trying to integrate the black and the white. Black absorbs energy, like the color spectrum. You can even look at it from that point of view. Black absorbs, whereas white repels. And so when we think about melanin, if you will, melanin, there's immortality in melanin. That's why if you have more melanated skin, you're able to soak up the sun more, because the sun gives life. The less melanated your skin, the more you repel it. And so you have to kind of find more artificial ways to really acquire, if you will, the life, if you will, the life into your body, and from the sun, if you will. And so I just talk about the differences within the black and white part of the checkerboard floor, if you will, of Freemasonry. And that's pretty much what Cream is about. A lot about money. And so, like I said, these topics I talk about, very much controversial topics, and money, sex, religion. And I know that many people will buck against a lot of things I say, but this is just a feminine perspective. This is just a perspective. If you disagree, I'm happy. I'm happy that you disagree. If I had a lot of people that agreed, if you will, there would be a stasis, right? And so we have to have some disagreement to make it interesting, an interesting story, an interesting play of existence. And so this book is just mainly to, to create a conversation, if you will, about our existence on the earth plane, or the hell realm. Can I get a hello there? So anywho, this is Cream, and I will see you guys in my next video. Don't forget to look at the comment section to click on that link to purchase the book, and I will see you guys in my next video. Thanks.